Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5-Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about how the Catholic Church, and in fact all Christian faiths, are meant to be passed on from generation to generation. How our ancestors did a much better job of how we're doing it now, and what can we do about it? Before we begin, let's start with a prayer. Nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filii et Spiritui Sancto, sic ut era in principio, et nunc et semper, et in saecula saeculorum. Amen. Clearly, Jesus Christ founded a visible church. You can see this played out in Matthew 18, where he gave the keys of the kingdom to Peter in Matthew 16. But then in Matthew 18, he tells the rest of the apostles, who are the future bishops, you have the power to bind and unbind. And also he says, when you have a problem with your neighbor, go talk to him, then bring two people, and then go take it to the church, right? So there's a visible institution. This visible institution, Christ and creations, be like, you know what? When John the Apostle, the last apostle, dies, that's it. Yeah, it was a good 30, 40-year run, and then I'm just going to close shop and go back to heaven, and yeah, you're all left to your own devices. Clearly not. He intended to create a visible church. He said that the church that he created, Matthew 16, the gates of hell will never prevail over it. And so for this church to exist until he returns in the second coming, it has to be passed on from generation to generation. St. Paul talks about how we must uphold and maintain the traditions that we get from our past brethren and pass it on. You look at the pastoral letters that he writes to Timothy and to Titus, it's all full of that kind of stuff in terms of like how to tend to the flock. There needs a flock to be existing for this to happen. So I did a very early episode, I think this channel has been around 4 years, where I said how we piss on the ancestors of our ancestors, essentially. And, you know, pardon my French, but what do I mean by this? I think we do a horrendously bad job passing the faith from one generation to another today. If you look at our ancestors, look at the religious wars that they had to go through. The wars against the Ottomans, even before that, you know, the wars against, you know, the religion of peace, going back to the Battle of Tours in the early 700s. But against the Seljuk Turks. I mean, the whole reason for the Crusades is because the Byzantine Empire was being attacked by the Seljuk Turks. And so they had a plea to Pope Urban, to the Western Europeans, to help them. But you can look at Nigeria today, where there's, again, religion of peace is persecuting a bunch of Catholics and Christians as well. And all over the world, look at North Korea, look at China, it's everywhere. Persecution exists. But back in the day, we would die for our faith. People would go to war in religious wars and die for our faith. Look at the French Revolution, look at the Russian Revolution, places where there's persecution of the church. People would gladly die for the faith. Look at San Juan Capistrano. He rode into a battle against the Turks holding a crucifix. You know, this doesn't really exist anymore, especially in America. So when we choose to embrace and adopt the snares of atheism, the snares of the devil, and we're like, you know what? Yeah, you know what? I might have some people, 1,500 years of Christian blood running through me, 1,000 years, depending on what part of Europe you're from. I'm just going to squander it because atheism sounds cool, you know, right? The benefits, quote unquote, of hedonism, which eventually turns into nihilism. Yeah, that sounds better. So all of our ancestors died for the faith. A lot of them passed on the faith for a lot of trial and tribulation, but ultimately, we just like, eh. And see, this has been the snares of this kind of postmodernist, moral relativistic world that we've lived in, this indifferentism, right? Everyone's going to heaven, you know. Hell is empty. We did an episode on that kind of belief that nobody's in hell. Well, if you feel this way, you know, you're going to be like, especially when you have all these things like just have as much sex as you want, get as drunk as you want, embezzle and steal as you want. Well, people are going to start leaving the faith that their family sacrificed for to live in this cesspool that we're living in today. And it's sad. It's sad when people choose to leave Christianity. It's like a relay race, right? You know, like a baton relay race. You have to pass the baton at a certain window for it to be legible. If you don't do it during that time where it's eligible, then you get disqualified. And it's the same thing when we're passing on the faith. You don't really pass on the faith to your kid when your kid is 50 years old and you're 70 years old, right? You pass it on when they're young. And I think as a whole, we're doing a very poor job. I mentioned the statistics once, how if your kid goes to a public school, 20 years later, they're only practicing Catholic 6% of the time. And if they go to a Catholic school, 20 years later, they're only practicing Catholic 12% of the time. Now, some of you homeschoolers like, see, we're much better than that. Yeah, the number's better, but it's not too much better. And so why is that? Why is the faith not being transmitted? And I think, it's the secularist cesspool that we live in, because many of us Catholics, you could say Christians really in general, are secularists masquerading as Christians. And I've talked about this before. We have a 2-part series on that. Look at your calendar. If your calendar only has Sunday Mass and there's nothing else, no works of mercy, no daily Mass, no devotions, you're really a secularist masquerading as a Catholic. And I think you really see it translated in your home. And look, I'm not casting aspersions on anybody, because I make these mistakes too. But if your home is full of Disney, Spotify, YouTube, your kids are in this secular world, they're going to get those values that are in the secular world. And ultimately, there ends up being a combative relationship between Christian Protestant, whatever it is you want to call it, parent versus the kid. Because you're teaching them, this is wrong, why homosexual marriage is wrong, why we don't contracept, why we believe, in the Trinity, all these things. They're not getting those messages if you have them in the cesspool milieu of the secular world. So but my teacher doesn't say that, my friends don't say this doesn't say it, YouTube doesn't say it, Netflix doesn't say it, why am I going to listen to you? And so already it's combative. So our best chance of transmitting the faith is really the kind of the Benedict option. You gotta surround your kids, and I see parents who do this. They homeschool their kids, and then everything in their home there is no streaming. They have a DVD player. All the content they have is religious content. They do everything together. They don't expose their kids to the outside world. And I think that's kind of what you have to do. That's your best chance of transmitting the faith, is don't let your kids get tainted by this secular world. Now, easier said than done, because we're all tainted by the secular world. How many of us are on YouTube, Netflix, and all the Silicon Valley Hollywood garbage, right? How many of us use those aforementioned things to babysit the kids because we need some time away? How many of us are addicted to the screens that we will, on one side of our mouth, malign as being bad for Christian values, but on the other side of our mouth are engaged in it, right? So it is a satanic struggle. The church was meant to be transmitted. We are doing a poor job of transmitting it. And I think, look, there's going to be kids like me. I grew up watching Brady Bunch and all these things, and I try to follow the faith the best that I can. And there's going to be kids who kind of grow up in this secular worldview that 30 years from now will be practicing their faith. But if you look, we've talked about this, for every 100 converts the Catholic Church gets, we lose 880 a year. So as a whole, what we've been doing the last 50 years ain't working, as we say here in Texas. It's not working, and we really need to change, because we have transmitted Holy Mother Church's faith, values, theology for 2,000 years. Right? We're coming up to 2033. But we're really probably at our worst point now in transmitting the faith, because back then, prior to really the onset of modernism in the late 1800s, we lived, whether you were a Lutheran in Sweden or a Calvinist in Switzerland or a Catholic, we were all in a Christian milieu that had Christian values. Whether you look at 900 AD or 1500 AD or 1700 AD, we were all in a Christian milieu. Everyone kind of had the same values, right? Fornication, premarital sex were not things that were lauded, whatever it was. And now we live in a world where every virtue is a vice and every vice is a virtue. So we don't live in that Christian worldview. So it's even harder now to transmit the faith. So guys, post in the comments. Let me know. How can we pass down the faith the best that we can? I'd love to hear your advice. Until next time, take care and God bless.